Hello and welcome to the RevRx podcast. My name is Chad Potts and I'm your host, and I'm so glad you joined us today. I'm excited to introduce you to my friend Lisa Ostreim. Lisa has an incredible journey of persevering through chronic disease that's taken her over a couple of decades of her life to navigate. I know many of you listening may be suffering from chronic disease, whether that be something minor or something extremely major like Lisa's. In today's episode, Lisa is going to chronicle for us her journey with kidney disease to the point where she ended up having to have a live organ transplant and all of the struggles that she's had through the years, all the struggles she continues to have. But here's the thing, how her faith in God has helped her make it through and make it through well. She has an incredible testimony. You're going to want to listen to the very end to hear about her faith, about her perseverance, and about how she's sharing the love of God and the difference He makes in our lives with this world. So I introduce to you my friend, Lisa. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Chad.
Yeah, sure. So you have a pretty cool story. You know, a lot of it is pushing through struggles, pushing through trials, and coming out on the other side. So you've been dealing with medical issues for 25 years or so now.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to just kind of ask you to talk about that journey with us. I'm sure many of our listeners have experienced some sort of medical issues. The medical field is sometimes tough to navigate, as well as just kind of our own human bodies and their limitations. So can you walk us through some of your challenges and kind of what you've learned through that story?
Sure. Yeah. I would say, I think a good place to start my story is that I became a believer in 1999.
Okay.
And then it was just 2 years later that I got really sick. So I was 25 when I got really sick. I was teaching. I was getting my master's degree, going to the gym, feeling good about life. And just kind of like tipping my toe into how to live as a believer, really.
Sure.
And then I literally woke up one morning very, very sick, and I knew something was wrong. Drove myself to the emergency room, and long story short, I ended up getting diagnosed with a disease called AHUS. It's atypical hemolytic uremic syndrome. And at the time, in my state where I live in Washington, there were only like 5 others. It's because it's considered an ultra rare disease.
Sure.
So it was tricky to diagnose, very tricky to treat because there really wasn't much known about it. So I just went along for years, just kind of allowing the doctors to try different things because I had no idea. I was so new. I had never spent a night in the hospital, and here I was spending weeks on end in the hospital, going in regularly for blood work. I'd never really even remember having blood work done, and sometimes it was daily, weekly. So trying different treatments and just kind of carried on like that for years. And the main thing that the disease did to me was it really impacted my kidneys. Not enough to need dialysis. I had a couple dialysis treatments, but not ongoing, but enough to make me learn a lot about how important the kidneys are. That's for sure.
Sure.
I learned that kidneys really impact your blood pressure. So suddenly I had to be on blood pressure medication. I wasn't on any medication prior to this. I learned that kidneys impact your red blood cell count. So I had to inject my body weekly with hormone to produce red blood cells in my body. I mean, and it felt very, very strange to be the age that I was and be so reliant on medication and, doctors and things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I continued teaching. I had to take some time off, but then I went back to teaching. Somewhere in there, I got married. And then about a year later, we adopted our first daughter. And I did know that I was very, very tired. I was very tired with the level that my kidneys were at. They were probably somewhere around like maybe 25%.
Okay.
But when I would tell the doctors how tired I was, they would just look at me as a mom of a young baby or a young child. And then we adopted a second one. So then it was like, well, no, you're tired because you're a mom and you're
Sure.
working. And, but I was exhausted. It was scary. I had been a new Christian when this huge trial hit. And I wouldn't say it shook my faith to where I turned away from God. I definitely questioned regularly, like why, when I would go get my blood work done, why isn't it how I'm praying it is, God,
Hmm.
um, why am I still at the same place?
Um, and so I think that's a pretty common place to be. You're a young believer.
Yeah.
Um, when it comes to your relationship with God,
Yes.
you're a young mom,
Hmm. Hmm.
and young moms shouldn't have all these health issues. I mean, that's
Right.
just what we think in our minds.
Right.
And I I still consider myself young. I'm not that young, but I've recently kind of had some health issues pop up. Previously, been 100% healthy, no issues.
Okay.
And even in my age, I'm like, man, I'm young to be having these problems. So, thinking about how you were feeling, thinking about what you were dealing with, I'm sure that was a struggle. And then you mentioned, kind of questioning. I think that's so normal.
Hmm.
Um, but yet sometimes we feel so bad, don't we? Whenever we have these questions for God, can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think there's a lot of people who are dealing with hardships, dealing with struggles.
Hmm.
Circumstances in life may not be how we want them to be or the path we would have chosen. Um, but then at the same time, okay, well, we see that the Lord is working. Um,
Yeah.
but I don't know why things are the way they are. So God, why?
Hmm.
What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, so I remember early on in my illness, going to meet with a pastor at the church that I went to at the time.
Hmm.
And and I didn't flat out ask this, but thankfully he picked up on what I was asking. He picked up on that I was asking basically for a formula, like
Yeah.
how could I pray? What do I need to say? What do I need
Hmm.
to do? And he was honest with me that he's like, that's not it's not how it works. I wish it was. I wish I could just say, here, pray this, Lisa, and this is what will happen. But he was very honest with me and vulnerable himself in sharing that, he'd walk through his own trials like that and wished that there was a way. But he really did encourage me to keep turning to God with my questions, to be okay with that. So even though that wasn't like instant, like, okay, now I feel okay sharing, asking my questions to God
Right.
and doubting, all of the things, fearing, all of that. Um, to hear someone else, a pastor especially that I respected and everything, and that was further along, he actually was the pastor who ended up being the pastor that married my husband and I later.
Oh,
But
cool.
just hearing him, like, okay, he struggled with this. And then still, like, just having moments in my health struggle early on there where, I remember like driving to the hospital for the next treatment that I was going to be getting and just hearing a worship song come on
Hmm.
and feeling like so much hope in me. And I can't explain why. Like why I'm going to get lab work done. I'm going to do this new treatment that they have no idea if it's going to work. But um, I don't know necessarily at the time if I could say this, but now I can look back and see how God was showing me it's okay, Lisa. Just keep on with me. Keep asking me, keep turning to me,
Hmm.
and He would give me those little encouragements along the way.
I love that little God nudges, I call them.
Yeah, for sure.
Just kind of letting us know He's there.
Mhm.
Couple things you said that I think are really interesting. Number one is that you started having these questions, and then you went to your pastor, and you're like, "Well, what do I need to do?
Yeah,
How do I fix this? What do I need to pray?" You wouldn't have said it this way, but basically, what you were looking for
yeah,
is a formula. So, can you tell me if I do X, Y, Z, then I'm going to be healed? Uh,
yeah, right.
if I perform this, if I do this, if I give enough of this, or if I, jump through these hoops in this way, then God will be pleased with me, and then therefore I will be in a better situation. We feel like that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people,
Yeah,
and that's not true at all.
right. Yeah,
And if you get into God's word, if you get into the Bible, you see that the stories are just full of bad things happening to good people,
yeah,
and then good things happening to bad people. It looks like that evil is winning, but we know that that's not the case.
yeah,
And we see that in our own lives. How could such a a bad thing happen to such a good person.
Mhm.
God, I gave my life to you. I surrendered my life to you. I had an interview earlier where somebody said, I put everything on the altar, and then that's when everything fell apart.
Mm.
But really, it's not about that. And then I even think back to, okay, you became a believer, and then these things started happening to you.
Mm.
Imagine if you hadn't.
Yes. Oh,
Imagine if
yeah.
you didn't have that hope
Oh,
as
man.
you were going through some of these struggles.
Yeah. Yes.
And all those reminders of, you know, this song coming on and filling me with hope.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that God has these ways of reaching us that
Mhm.
we know it's Him, and
Yeah.
that varies from person to person.
Yeah.
Little God winks, little God nudges to where He's like, I, I hear you,
Yeah.
I'm with you. God may not make our circumstances go away.
Mhm.
Can He? Yes, He's God.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Mhm.
Oftentimes, God doesn't make our circumstances go away,
Mhm.
but He's with us in the midst of those circumstances,
Yes.
and that makes all the difference in the world.
Yes.
And so, that's a story that you're sharing with us today.
Uh-huh.
You're a young mother, you're exhausted, you got all these things going on,
Yeah.
but yet you've still felt the presence of God with you.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and so then things kind of progressed, I guess, to the point of you ended up needing a new kidney, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was quite a process. Just the testing for it. Well, it was very hard for me to
Mm.
accept that this is what's happening. This is what if the doctor's saying that they don't tell just anyone that they suggest they have a kidney transplant.
Right.
This is real. But there's still a big part of me that was in denial and thinking to myself, I'm not on dialysis. So maybe I don't really need this. Maybe I hold out um, but I proceeded with the testing, and then a lot of people that I know, several people that I know, went through testing to see if they were a
Mm.
match. The doctors recommended I not have a biological family member donate because of the particular disease that I have. So my brother-in-law was a match,
Oh, cool.
and we were all set for that to happen. We had a date set and everything. Something I didn't mention is that just a couple years after my diagnosis of AHUS, I was diagnosed with melanoma, skin
Uh,
cancer,
uh-huh.
and it was caught very early, so it was a fairly easy process. But because of that, I was tested every 6 months. Just a few months before my transplant, I was checked for skin cancer, and there was a spot found on my
Mm.
foot, and it was melanoma. And so the decision was that as long as the wound healed, I could go ahead with the transplant. Well, a week before transplant, the doctor called me and said, "We've decided that the melanoma was invasive, so you need to wait 2 years for this
Oh, no.
transplant." This was literally a week before my transplant. So that was a big shock to our
Mm.
family. My girls at that time were second grade and fourth grade, so they were old enough to start to see that mom's tired.
Yeah,
She needs this. This is going to be a good thing for mom.
sure.
And then it was canceled. So that was just another piece of my story, though. That
Mm.
day was devastating to get that call. And then the next morning, thankfully I had developed at that time a routine, a habit of
Mm.
going to a closet and praying. And so I went to my closet that morning with all of this, like, God, what is going on? And just devastated, brought my feelings, everything that I was feeling to Him. And the next thing I knew, I was laughing, and I just felt this sense of awe. And what he showed me is that he is sovereign. Like,
Mm.
everything was in place. I mean,
Mm.
everything was in place. Like, who would take care of my kids? Who would take care of my sister's kids? Because it was her husband. Like, my teaching job, everything was in place. Um, and within a very short amount of time, the whole thing was upturned. So it was like,
Mm.
okay, and so I just felt a total sense of awe. God, what are you doing here? So through that whole situation, I just came to know His character at a different level, and trusted Him more than I ever had
Mm.
before. And sharing all of this with my family, and my girls getting to see that, my husband getting to see that. Devastation one night, and then hope the next morning.
Wow.
With that, I began homeschooling our girls because I needed to care for my health better. I needed to not be working. So, and the school wasn't going wonderfully for them anyway. So we decided to homeschool, and um, I ended up getting 4 more years under my belt with not needing dialysis, with like my kidneys just held on basically
Mm-hmm.
for those 4 years. So then, though, they did start to decline just enough where it was like, okay, you're getting close to maybe either needing dialysis or transplant.
Mm-hmm.
So this time, because of the melanoma history and things, my doctor recommended I receive a deceased donor kidney
Okay.
instead of having a family member or friend donate. Within 2 days, I got a call, and it was my call for the transplant. So went and got the transplant, and that was quite a process itself too. The surgery went well.
Uh-huh.
And everything, but it's the medications that are
Mm-hmm.
very, very challenging, or they at least very much for me. It took about a year and a half after my transplant to actually feel thankful that I received it,
Wow.
and that felt really kind of yucky because people would be very excited for me,
Yeah.
and they would, talk about what a blessing that is, and here I would have raging migraines daily.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just pain throughout my body, like all sorts of skin issues and eye vision issues, just almost like daily functioning was just very, very challenging. So to on the one hand be like, yes, I'm so thankful I received this kidney while others are waiting and waiting, waiting on the list. Yes, I'm
Sure.
thankful. At the same time, I actually feel worse
Yeah.
than I did before the transplant. So
Yeah, and that's tough.
yeah,
And everything you just described to us, you're kind of up and down, right? So you're gonna get its transplant. Oh, no, you're not.
yeah,
And I love the fact that the Lord literally turned your mourning into joy
yes,
the next day.
yeah,
And what a testimony that is to His goodness, right?
yes.
Uh, we don't just do that on our own. That's not natural. That's
No,
supernatural.
not at all.
And so the Lord can do that. And I just want to make that clear to our listeners that you are a testimony of the fact that God can turn our mourning into joy literally overnight.
Yeah,
um, and then you make some changes. I love the fact that you mentioned it's just the next step of my testimony. And I'm sure it didn't necessarily feel that way at the
right,
time,
right.
because you had all these things lined up. But when God started revealing Himself as, okay, you had all these things lined up, and now it feels like everything's out of control again,
Hmm.
but I'm still in control. Um,
Yes, yes.
that just that's just God wrapping His arms around you.
I know. Yeah.
And so I love that, absolutely love that, um,
Mhm,
because He is good and He is faithful, and He
mhm.
met you where you were. You
Yeah.
brought everything to Him, and
Mhm.
He was able to say, hey, let me take that from you.
Yeah.
Scripture tells us that He wants us to bring our burdens to Him. He will help us bear them, and
Yeah.
what a testimony that is.
Yeah.
And then you go along the way, and okay, 2 years down the road,
Mhm.
that transplant's going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm going to get it. Everything's going to be great.
Yeah.
Says what we've been waiting for 20 years now,
Yeah.
and then, but I feel worse.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's just, man, this journey is, it is not straight like we think it's going to be.
No.
Um, and a lot of times we feel like we've got things mapped out the way we want them to go, in a way that, uh, but really rarely things turn out that way. And you're living this in your daily life.
Yeah.
Um, and I can't imagine the dejection that comes
Mhm.
from it. And probably, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but, there's probably just a feeling of, well, I've just got to put on a happy face, because
Mhm.
people are so happy for me because I've received this kidney transplant, and I'm thankful for it, yes, but
Yeah.
I don't feel good.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you feel like you can't say that,
Yeah.
so you've got to just put on this face and say, yeah, yeah, everything's fine.
Mhm.
And to varying degrees, I think we all do that from time to time, don't we?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we say, how are you doing? I'm good.
Mhm.
I'm fine. I'm okay.
Yeah.
Um, when we're in reality, we're not. And
Yeah.
so, um, just a struggle. I mean,
Mhm.
struggle after struggle,
Uh-huh.
but yet you still keep pushing along,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so, with those medications, and yeah, so I'm a pharmacist, that gets my attention.
Yeah.
Um, we're literally taking an organ from somebody else
Yeah.
that does not belong to you, and we're putting
Yeah.
it in your body,
Mhm.
and we're telling your body, don't reject that.
Right. Yes.
Everything within your body wants to fight that and attack that and
Mhm.
do away with that because it's not yours.
Yeah.
And so then the amount of medications, and that's one thing I wanted to highlight,
Mhm.
because unless you've been through it, you just don't understand the amount of medication that you have to take
Mhm.
to be able to turn off those mechanisms in the body that want to attack that organ
Yeah.
is incredible.
Mhm.
And we all know, every medication has its risk.
Yeah.
Every medication has its side effects. So when you're taking that much medication,
Mhm.
and these are not, harmless little blood pressure pills.
Right. It's not
They
Tylenol or anything. Yeah.
No, right, yeah. These are medications that are, completely changing the way that your body typically reacts to something.
Yes.
You know, you had some issues with that, a
Yeah.
year and a half of issues with that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so, can you delve a little more into that about just how you felt through that process of, I had expectations that
Yeah.
this was going to take my problems away, and in
Mhm.
fact, it's kind of made it worse right now.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it was debilitating
Mm,
a lot of the time, honestly. I'm thankful, so thankful for the times that I had leading up to that, like the big moment of the one transplant being canceled and God showing himself to me so
yeah.
strongly because I did keep meeting with God regularly, and that was the only thing that thing kept me going. I
Mm,
know that's the only thing that kept me going, that habit of just meeting with him regularly still. And I would tell him, and I would journal to him like, I feel terrible. Like
mm,
my head is pounding, I can't do the things that I want to do, or I can't drive my girls where they need to go. Um, and just the honesty with him, at least, that I'm not well. I'm not feeling, like I'm so wondering, why did I do this? Was this a mistake and all of that? So I would have moments where like my head wouldn't hurt and I would
mm,
notice that my energy felt better, and it
mm,
would not be very often, but I would just think, okay, maybe that's coming.
yeah.
And in that, I just feel like God just continued to strengthen me, and give me my voice, because I ended up having to have hard conversations with my doctor and say that, look, this is not working out. We need to try something else. I've done my own research. I know there are
Mm,
other medications.
yep.
I'm not going to compromise my kidney. So if you say to me that no, this will absolutely not work, I'm not going to do something stupid.
Right.
Just trust me, though. Can we try? Because there were three major, medications to prevent the transplant, like you said, to prevent rejection, that
Right.
I'm on for life. And so that's another thing of looking at. Okay, I'm on this for life. Okay, I can't. I'm not. This isn't working out.
Uh-uh.
So the main one, I asked, can we please try something else? So
Mm,
um, the one doctor, he would not veer from
mm,
that. And, I have to trust that he had his reason. But thankfully, my local nephrologist that I'd been with since I first got sick, he was willing to talk to me about this. And let's look at something else. Let's look at another specialist that deals with transplant
yeah.
in the same city and everything, and see what he thinks. Let's get another opinion, essentially. So
Yeah.
I ended up having this other doctor give another opinion, and even because of my skin cancer risk, this other medication was really standing out. Of like, I think you should try this.
Mm,
So
mm,
it wasn't just me blindly like, hey, let's try this random thing.
yeah.
But then they let me try this medication that was super helpful. And then my doctor that's been with me forever, thankfully since 1999, he also seems to really understand and respect the fact that I just cannot tolerate the amount of medications that
Yep.
other people can. So
Right.
my level, they check the level of the medication. It's much lower than any other doctor would probably recommend.
Yeah.
But I said, I will test weekly. I will test my kidney function weekly if I can. I was desperate. I got
Yeah.
to try something else. And um, so anyway, I still have some side effects
Mm,
that creep up, but it is far better. So with that time period, prior to getting to switch medications, I was in bed, just feeling so defeated, just
mm,
so much pain, hearing my family like living their life, and just so defeated. And I feel that God spoke to me. I feel like He asked me, Lisa, do you want to be well? Just like in
Mm,
John 5:6. It's when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time. He asked him, do you want to get well?
mm,
And I honestly don't remember if I had recently read that passage or not. I don't know. But I feel like he asked me, do you want to be well? And I just was like, what do you mean? I mean, I just imagine how that man at the pool probably, I
yeah,
don't know if he was like me, but I was like, what do you mean? Do I want to be? Yes, I want to be well. I've been
of
asking
course.
of
Yeah.
course I want to be well. Um, and he just asked me to trust him, just
Mm,
to walk with him, and that's when he started to reveal to me little by little this idea of becoming a health coach.
okay.
And that just seemed so weird to me. Like, what? I'm in bed, just like the man at the pool must have thought. Like, what do you mean? I'm laying at the pool for 38 years. Um, and but he told me, I want you to be a health coach. And so that's the next part of the story, is that I did pursue that, and just again began to trust his voice more and more in my life, his guidance more and more in my life, and use my voice with the doctors to say, like, I've got
Hmm.
more. I feel like I have more life to live. Now God's calling me to be a health coach, so I cannot be here in this bed
Right,
like
right.
that. So
And there's a couple things that I wanted to kind of revisit during that part of your story.
okay.
Um, and so what a journey it's been for you. One common theme that I keep hearing, and it's refreshing and it's convicting a
Mhm.
little bit, to be honest,
Mhm.
is that even as a young believer, you understood that it's okay to be honest with God.
Yeah.
It's okay to be vulnerable with God. So in those beginning days, you had these questions, these doubts for God. I think sometimes we have questions and doubts for God too,
Mhm.
but you brought them to Him.
Yeah.
And He wants us to bring those to Him. He's big enough to handle our doubts and our questions. And
Yeah.
so, some people feel like, oh, we shouldn't question God.
Mhm.
He's big enough to handle that. He's not insulted by our questions and our doubts. He knows we're going to have those as we do this life
Yes.
that He's called us to live. And so I love that. And then as you went forward, you brought all of those emotions that came from the disappointment of that transplant not working out,
Mhm.
a complete pivot in your story. Lord, where is this going? And you brought all those emotions to Him, and He renewed your strength.
Yeah.
He renewed your hope
Yeah.
on that night.
Yes.
And then, even as you go along, and so now you finally got this transplant,
Mhm.
but you're feeling awful,
Mhm.
not being afraid to just be vulnerable with God and saying, you know what, this isn't life either.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a big part of that too is kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but being your own advocate
Yeah.
to the medical field.
Uh-huh.
So as someone in the medical field, I say 100% absolutely.
Mm.
You need to advocate for your own health.
Yeah.
And I think every physician who's out there, uh, is out to help.
Mhm.
100%. That's what they want to do. That's what they're trying to
Yes.
do.
Yeah.
And there's evidence-based medicine that tells us, here's the best thing for
Yeah.
certain people. But
Mhm.
being able to individualize that to a single person, to a single case, is something that's a little bit harder to do.
Yeah.
And so, when you are sitting there in bed and you're like, okay, this is obviously not working. We've got to find something else.
Yeah.
Reaching out to some of these groups of, survivors of transplants,
Mhm.
and, finding others who've been through that down this journey and doing
Yeah.
some research, and, being able to present him with this plan of, okay, what are some other options?
Yes.
And then even pursuing other options through a different provider.
Yeah.
Um, doing whatever you had to do in order to say, I can't just stay in this bed forever.
Yeah.
God's calling me to do something more. I'm reminded. So I love the book of John, my favorite
Mhm.
book of the Bible. I
Me
love
too.
that story in John.
Yes.
One of the ones that I focus on with my coaching
Uh-huh.
is John 10:10.
Mhm.
Jesus says, I've come so you may have life and have it abundantly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how many times do we settle for less than that abundant life?
Mhm.
And so, you feel like God's calling you to this abundance, to this place of help coaching, this place of helping others,
Yeah.
navigate their own health journey. And
Mm.
kudos to you for just,
Mhm.
being your own advocate. And I
Yeah.
say that's so important. A lot of times we blindly go into the medical community and we say, well, my doctor said this, so this is the way it's got to be.
Mhm.
but I think our bodies have a way of kind of knowing when things aren't right too.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and and as a pharmacist, I tell you, there are tons of options for most treatments.
Uh-huh.
So if something's not jiving with you, something
Yeah.
in your case where you're more sensitive to some of the drugs than
Yeah.
someone else may be too.
Uh-huh.
And so individualization of a drug regimen is something that is so important. And
Yeah.
so, reach out to your local pharmacist, reach out to your physician to,
Hmm.
get a second opinion. That's totally okay.
Yeah.
Don't worry about hurting feelings.
Right.
You've got to do what you've got to do in order to reach your fullness and your potential.
Yeah.
And so I want to say kudos to you for doing that. I wish more people would take a stand and be their own advocate. And there's a good way to do that,
Hmm. Yeah.
without being confrontational, without being rude about it. But if you let
Yes.
the Lord guide you, He's going to help you find what you need. And
Hmm.
that's what He did for you. So
Hmm.
that brought you now into this area of health coaching.
Yes.
And one of the things you mentioned too, you'd mentioned that you developed this habit of going to your prayer closet.
Yes.
Um,
Uh-huh.
and that's something that kept you and sustained you through
Yeah.
this difficult journey.
Yes.
And so, for the rest of this, I want to kind of marry those two thoughts together. So now you're a health coach,
Yeah.
you're a podcaster,
Hmm.
and you're an author.
Hmm.
And you talk about these healthy, grace-filled habits in our
Hmm.
life. So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about your book, talk a little about your coaching and
Yeah.
how you implement the use of habits in order to lead us down this road of optimal health?
Yeah. Yeah. So, the way habits really started to become so important to me is that with my health and all the medications I was on, I just felt really strongly that there were little things that I could do daily
Mm,
that would add up over time, whether I saw it, years later or whatever. But like a big thing for me was drinking water prior to my prior to my transplant and after with medications I was on and
mhm.
just knowing the toxins that were building up in my body. Like, I'm just like, okay, I'm going to drink water and I'm not going to drink anything else.
Sure.
Like just doing what the small things that I could do.
Yes.
Um, that like healthy things like that, like thinking about the healthy, the, the highest quality food I could buy, and things like that. Exercising what I could do,
Hmm.
and everything was that way. Like, it was small, in some ways, but big over time. And
Yeah.
so I just started to think about how I wanted to share that. I just felt like that was how God was leading me to lead other women. And so I tested it out by doing like a 1 week little boot camp online,
Uh-huh.
and where we just worked for 1 week on mini habits. And then at the end of that, when I asked for feedback, one of the women said, I just really felt grace through the whole week. And so
Mm.
I just see how God kept like just sticking things in there for me. Like, okay, then that's where I ended up starting to think about the grace filled habits
Uh-huh.
for my book. That's the title of my book, Grace Filled Habits. Um, so my coaching, though, comes mostly is centered around one on one coaching with women to directly work on their habits. Um, and then the podcast that my podcast partner and I have is Simple Steps for the Whole You. And that's the shirt that I'm wearing here. But we work on that, just the small, simple steps. So everything that I'm doing coaching wise, podcast wise, book wise, it's all centered around that idea of just the small habits offered to God and watching Him multiply them.
Wow, I love that. When we think about, all right, I want to be optimally healthy,
Hmm.
um, it seems overwhelming.
Hmm.
And so I love this idea of simple steps. You'd mentioned, okay, I'm going to drink some water,
Hmm.
X amount of water a day.
Yeah.
I'm going to eat high quality food.
Hmm.
I'm going to exercise, this amount every day or every week.
Uh-huh.
Um, if there's a laundry list of things that we could do,
Yeah.
that could help us with our health.
Yeah.
What strategies do you guys teach when it comes to that? Is it kind of a one at a time approach, or is it just kind of like a let's do them all at the same time? Or what's the best way to go about? So if I've got listeners wanting to implement some of these steps, because you've mentioned some really great things,
Uh-huh.
what's the best way to do that in our lives?
Yeah. So we encourage them just to choose one and start working on it.
Okay.
Um, and then in my book, there's a few chapters leading up, just kind of helping the listener or the reader kind of start to grasp that idea of God's grace and love and his gentleness. And then there are 3 chapters in a row where they work on one habit at a time. So the first chapter is working on a spiritual growth habit, and they have 30 days to work on that. There's a tracker in there where they can mark how they're doing. There's reflection questions. So it's just one small habit at a time. And then when they finish that 30 days, they'll go on to the next chapter where they'll add in a movement habit. And these are, I walk through it in the book, but I mean, these are small. It's like try to put on your shoes and walk outside that day.
Yeah. We're not talking about going to gym for 3 hours at a time,
right?
Or going on a 3-mile run. The idea being simple. What is doable for you right now, and how can you make those changes and be able to implement them on any day?
Yeah. Yes. And then there's another chapter on nutrition.
Awesome.
So they basically end up with 90 days of working on 3 small habits. So that's definitely what I recommend, one at a time. So making it really small, and the idea of failure not really being failure, like what you can learn from that. And you miss a day, pick it up again the next day.
Yeah. And, and the phrase that comes to mind when you say that is give yourself grace.
Yeah.
They're grace-filled habits. And I think a lot of times we're so hard on ourselves because when we're trying to implement these things, if we miss a day, we're like, well, I might as well just quit.
Yeah. Right.
But giving yourself grace through that process of, just being able to say, you know what, I'm trying. Something's better than nothing.
Yeah.
Simple is better than complex.
Yes.
And one at a time is better than all at one time. What a joy this has been. Fantastic conversation we've had. I'm so glad that you've shared your story with us. We see the goodness and the faithfulness of God all over your life. I'm so glad that God has brought you through all of that, because it is your testimony.
Yeah.
And it is how you are now, without some of those lessons, without some of those situations that you were put in, you wouldn't be the woman that you are today.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't be able to help people in the way that you're helping people today. So I saw something the other day, and it talks about, us as parents, and a lot of times we try to protect our kids from things.
Yeah.
We want them to always take the right path. But one of the things this post said was you can't protect your children from their testimony.
Yeah.
And I really, really like that, because it makes us view our circumstances differently.
Yeah.
Our trials can become our testimony through the power of God and what he can do in our lives.
Yeah.
And you're a living example of that. So for our listeners that may want to get involved with you, particularly ladies, where can they enter into your world, whether it be through your podcast, through your book, or through your coaching?
Yeah. Well, my website is empoweringhealthcoach.com. My book is Grace-Filled Habits, The Ripple Effects of Spiritual Growth. And then podcast is Simple Steps for the Whole You. And it's every Tuesday we release a new episode with my partner, Michelle Tornetta. And we're on every, the major podcast platforms.
Well, thank you, Lisa. Great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us, and hope you have a blessed evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the RevRx podcast. We hope you enjoyed what you heard today, and if so, we'd love it if you would hit that subscribe button so that you'll never miss a new episode from us. Also, feel free to leave us reviews and comments, as we'd love to hear from you. Be blessed and be the very best you.